It's terrible that after 50 years it is behind closed doors.
The room fell silent before Catherine had even finished reading. Beneath Diana's unmistakable signature was a final instruction no one inside the palace could misunderstand. Camilla must never be permitted to enter the private royal vault containing the late princess's jewels and personal effects. Catherine lowered the note with trembling hands, looked directly at William, and realized that honoring Diana's last boundary could ignite the most painful confrontation of their lives. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine drew a breath, but her voice faltered when she repeated Camilla's name. William stood across the table, one hand pressed against its edge. The prince had entered Windsor's private archive room, expecting clarity about an old envelope. Instead, he heard his mother set a boundary from beyond the grave, pulling him toward pain he had spent decades containing. The Crown Collection trustee watched them before explaining what had been preserved. A trustee is someone formally responsible for protecting valuable property on behalf of others. Diana's envelope remained restricted because the named jewels, photographs, reflections, and ceremonial belongings were intended for her sons and descendants. They were not palace decorations to be reassigned whenever an occasion demanded them. Catherine looked down and broke the silence with the truth no one could soften. She had unsealed Diana's wax-marked envelope, and the final note explicitly banned Camilla from entering the palace vault or handling anything in the protected collection. The princess grieved for the woman she had never known while feeling the weight of serving Diana's family. Enforcing this instruction would defend that legacy, but could fracture the household around her. William finally lifted his eyes. Anger sharpened his expression, but beneath it sat a son's disbelief at how deeply his mother had feared losing control of her story. Before he answered, the trustee pointed beneath Diana's signature. Queen Elizabeth II had acknowledged the instruction through restricted palace protocol, a confidential process preserving sensitive family directions, and added 6 decisive words: to remain sealed until access is challenged. That sentence changed everything. Someone had recently attempted to reach the collection, automatically triggering the note's release. Catherine had barely folded the page when a palace secretary entered, closed the door, and delivered the warning they feared. Camilla was approaching the vault corridor. She expected the doors opened within minutes. Catherine rose with Diana's note held in both hands. William moved beside her. No one there could remain safely neutral. The question was no longer whether the boundary would be enforced, but whether Charles would support them when Camilla reached the locked door and demanded the key. This was never simply a struggle over jewels, keys, or royal privilege. For Catherine, the vault represented a responsibility inherited through William and their children. For Camilla, being denied entry threatened to revive the one comparison she could never fully escape. And for Diana, whose voice now traveled through a sealed page, the boundary was a final attempt to protect the private pieces of a life consumed by public betrayal. Catherine carried the note into a private dressing room and closed the door behind William. The restricted vault was a protected storage space, containing Diana's personal jewels, handwritten reflections, photographs, ceremonial accessories, and objects reserved for her sons and future descendants. It was separate from the crown jewels, the nationally important crowns and ceremonial objects held in trust for the monarchy. This distinction mattered. Camilla was not being denied access to royal property. She was being kept away from possessions Diana had deliberately preserved for her family. William watched as Catherine pressed the note against her chest. Over the years, the prince had entrusted his wife with meaningful pieces connected to his mother, allowing her to carry Diana's memory without pretending to replace her. That trust had slowly made Catherine a guardian of the late princess's public legacy. Yet the responsibility now felt painfully personal. She admitted that enforcing the instruction felt like stepping into an argument that had begun long before she entered the royal family. William answered softly, "You did not create this boundary. You were chosen to protect it." Across the palace, Camilla received a short notice suspending her appointment. The queen consort read it twice before placing it on the table. Her expression hardened, but the silence that followed exposed something deeper than anger. Diana's rejection had crossed the years and reached her at the exact moment she believed the past had finally lost its power. Camilla had gained rank, recognition, and a place beside Charles, yet one locked door still declared that acceptance had limits. William then shared the detail he had found in the trustee's documented access account. Camilla had not requested entry merely to inspect the collection. She wanted to select an heirloom for an upcoming palace ceremony, a formal royal event designed to represent unity and continuity. The requested piece was Diana's rarely displayed sapphire and pearl headpiece. William remembered seeing it during childhood, and the thought of it being used to suggest reconciliation without his mother's consent filled him with quiet fury. Catherine opened the velvet case containing the vault key. She understood why Diana's warning had suddenly awakened, but one mystery remained. Who had allowed Camilla's request to move so far through the palace? Catherine placed the key inside her handbag and faced William. "If she asks me directly, I will answer her directly." Yet before that confrontation could happen, they needed to uncover what had taken place inside the palace 3 nights earlier. The chain of events began 3 nights earlier, long after the palace offices had emptied. At 10:40 p.m., Camilla entered the collection curator's study and requested private access to Diana's stored ceremonial pieces before the approaching state reception. One sentence changed everything. She wanted the sapphire and pearl headpiece transferred to her dressing room before Catherine could be informed. That request activated an instruction waiting silently for decades. Camilla placed her request before Eleanor Harcourt and expected immediate agreement. The collection curator, a specialist responsible for recording, protecting, and controlling access to historic royal possessions, understood exactly what was being demanded. The state reception was a formal palace gathering, where senior royals represented the crown before invited guests and officials. Wearing Diana's headpiece there would not look like a private choice. It would send a powerful public message that the past had been absorbed, settled, and placed under the Queen's control. Eleanor kept her voice steady as she explained the restriction. Any transfer involving Diana's private collection required approval from William and Catherine, the designated family custodian entrusted with protecting those possessions. Camilla rejected that answer. The Queen Consort insisted that her position beside Charles gave her enough authority to borrow the piece without seeking permission from the late princess's son or daughter-in-law. Harcourt felt trapped between obedience to the monarch's wife and loyalty to a recorded promise that had survived for decades. The curator reached toward the security terminal, but her hand began to shake. She could have entered the access code and allowed the transfer to proceed quietly. Instead, Eleanor withdrew her fingers and refused. Camilla pushed back her chair, stunned by the resistance. She warned that blocking her request would make the household appear divided before the state reception. Harcourt answered that opening the vault without authorization would create a far deeper division, one that could never be hidden. Camilla left without another word, but her silence felt more dangerous than an outburst. Eleanor immediately opened the original collection register, a documented account listing each protected item and every condition attached to it. Beneath the entry for Diana's sapphire and pearl headpiece, she discovered a coded instruction directing the trustees to release a sealed envelope whenever Camilla sought access. The warning had not appeared by accident. Diana had anticipated this exact request. Security records deepened the mystery. At 4:18 a.m., Camilla's private office submitted a second access application, proving the refusal had not ended the effort. Eleanor understood that the vault could be opened before Catherine even knew a challenge had been made. Harcourt called William personally at 6:12 a.m. The prince listened as she read the documented entries aloud, then remained silent. When Eleanor finished, he delivered one command: "Bring the sealed note to Catherine. No one opens that vault." Now Camilla was approaching the restricted corridor, and Catherine was waiting with Diana's words in her hand. Camilla stopped only a few feet from the vault entrance. Catherine stood between her and the locked doors, outwardly composed but gripping Diana's note tightly enough to crease its edge. No aides remained in the corridor, and no ceremony could soften what came next. When Camilla demanded to know who had cancelled her access, Catherine did not look toward William or the trustee. She answered with 4 devastating words. Diana herself barred it. Silence struck the corridor. William remained beside the security panel, the protected control system that recorded every attempt to open the vault, while the Crown Collection trustee stood farther back with the official access register. Catherine explained that the unsealed note prohibited Camilla from entering the space, handling its contents, or borrowing anything classified as Diana's private property. Those items belonged to a protected family collection intended for the late princess's sons and descendants. They could not be treated as ordinary palace accessories. Camilla stared at Catherine with wounded disbelief. The queen consort accused her of using Diana's memory to embarrass her before an important royal event. Catherine refused to retreat. She had not written the boundary, she said, and she had not chosen the painful history behind it. The princess had only been appointed to honor a final instruction. Ignoring that duty would betray William, his children, and the woman whose possessions had been placed under her protection. William tried to remain silent, but Camilla's next words shattered his restraint. She dismissed the instruction as an old grievance that should no longer control the living monarchy. The prince stepped away from the panel and told her that his mother's final wishes could not be reduced to an inconvenience. Diana had lost control of much of her public story while she was alive. William would not allow the same thing to happen to her private legacy after death. Catherine unfolded the note and read the decisive passage aloud. Diana feared that her possessions would eventually be absorbed into a carefully managed royal image, making the public forget the pain attached to them. Her warning was not against unity, it was against rewriting history. The documented words left Camilla visibly shaken, because the requested sapphire and pearl headpiece would have been worn as proof that the past had finally been settled. Camilla demanded the full page. Catherine revealed that Queen Elizabeth II had added a separate directive preventing the original note from leaving the appointed custodian's possession. A custodian is the person formally trusted to protect an item and control who may handle it. The late monarch's handwritten order meant Catherine could read the instruction, but she could not surrender it, not even to the king's wife. Camilla reached toward the document. Catherine stepped back. William pressed the security control, and the vault's internal locks engaged as the warning light turned red. The door was closed, but the struggle was not over. Diana's sentence could wound Camilla. Only Charles's living authority could make it impossible to ignore. Diana's note carried emotional force, but the handwriting beneath it carried institutional power. Queen Elizabeth II had reviewed the instruction years after Diana's death and ordered the private collection to remain protected for William, Harry, and their descendants. That quiet endorsement transformed a mother's plea into a palace obligation. Charles now faced an agonizing choice: defend his wife's dignity or uphold a restriction preserved by his former wife and his late mother. Charles carried both pages into his private study and dismissed everyone except the collection trustee. Diana's note applied to a privately designated family collection, meaning possessions reserved for named relatives rather than items owned by the crown. The late Queen's appended order placed that collection under a trustee-controlled access protocol, a formal system requiring several authorized people to approve entry. Catherine held the physical custodian key, William controlled family approval, and the trustee managed the electronic register. Harry remained a named beneficiary, but neither brother could ignore Elizabeth's written safeguards. Charles read the pages slowly. His expression changed when he reached his mother's signature, and the king set the file down without speaking for nearly a minute. Elizabeth had understood that Diana's possessions carried wounds as well as memories. She had also understood that one careless transfer could divide William from the monarchy he was expected to lead. For Charles, that knowledge made the decision painfully personal. Supporting Camilla might protect his marriage, but overruling his mother could damage his bond with both sons. Camilla entered after the trustee withdrew. The queen consort asked her husband to overturn the restriction, arguing that accepting it would permanently mark her as an intruder inside her own household. She had spent years serving beside him, yet Diana's note could still place her beyond a locked door. Charles heard the pain beneath her anger, but he answered quietly. Erasing the boundary would not create unity. It would reopen William's oldest wounds and force Catherine to surrender a responsibility formally entrusted to her. The trustee returned with the documented final amendment. He showed Charles the exact line Elizabeth had added. No reigning spouse could cancel the restriction for personal or ceremonial convenience. A reigning spouse is the husband or wife of the monarch, holding royal status without possessing the sovereign's full authority. The safeguard named no exceptions. Even Camilla's position beside the king could not defeat it. Charles then discovered the hidden consequence. Approving Camilla's request would automatically remove Catherine as custodian, because she had refused an unauthorized transfer. The issue was no longer one borrowed headpiece. It had become a direct challenge to Catherine's standing, William's approval rights, and the late Queen's final authority. Charles dismissed every advisor. He took up his pen, paused once, then signed the suspension of Camilla's access request. The sapphire and pearl headpiece would remain under Catherine's protection. The rule had survived. But when the signed decision reached Camilla's rooms, private rejection began turning into visible palace fallout. The consequences arrived without shouting. Camilla's vault pass disappeared from the security register, her ceremonial jewel request was withdrawn, and 2 collection meetings vanished from her schedule before lunch. She sat alone as each notification appeared, watching a lifetime of royal acceptance contract into one unmistakable reality. There was still a room inside the monarchy she could never enter. Then an attendant arrived to collect the velvet case prepared for the sapphire headpiece. Camilla said nothing as the administrative order took effect. Her temporary access code was cancelled, her vault appointment was removed, and palace curators were instructed to send every Diana-related request directly to Catherine. Custodianship meant the legal and personal responsibility to protect private possessions and control their use. Staff received a written briefing explaining that the restriction concerned family ownership, not royal rank. That distinction mattered because gossip could not weaken the order, and Camilla could not restore her access by invoking her position beside the king. The attendant lifted the empty presentation case from the dressing table. Camilla watched it leave with the ceremony card still resting inside, a reminder of the jewel she had expected to wear. She remained composed until the door closed. Then the queen consort removed her glasses and wiped away a single tear. Years of public service, careful duty, and hard-won acceptance suddenly seemed powerless against one final instruction from Diana. Charles entered without aids. Camilla told him his signature had left her feeling condemned by 2 women who were no longer alive. The king did not deny her pain, but he refused to reverse the decision. He explained that ignoring his late mother's directive would destroy trust in the palace safeguards. More painfully, refusing Diana's boundary again would condemn his relationship with William. Charles had protected his wife's dignity for years. This time, protecting her request would cost him his son. Catherine received a revised ceremony plan before evening. The new arrangement placed her prominently beside William and authorized her to wear another piece from Diana's protected collection. A ceremony plan is the official schedule assigning royal positions, duties, and approved items for a formal event. The change confirmed that Catherine remained custodian. Yet she felt no victory. The princess understood that her strengthened position had deepened Camilla's isolation. William then received a documented draft from the palace communications archive. Camilla's office had prepared a press description presenting the sapphire and pearl headpiece as a symbol of royal continuity. The wording explained the urgency. Wearing it would have publicly suggested that Diana's story had passed peacefully into the Queen's hands. William now knew the request had never been merely personal. Camilla removed her name card from the next collection briefing and placed it face down. At that same moment, Catherine asked William for one final private meeting before the palace announced its decision. The rules had finished their work. What remained was a human choice between two people carrying Diana's absence in profoundly different ways. That evening, Catherine and William entered the vault alone. There were no trustees, courtiers, cameras, or competing titles. Only Diana's carefully stored belongings and the silence of a family memory neither wanted to exploit. Catherine placed the unsealed note beside its original envelope and told her husband that protecting Diana must never become an excuse to punish Camilla. William's answer revealed the true turning point. The boundary would remain, but the humiliation would stop. Catherine began examining the collection with William beside her. Together, they identified which jewels, photographs, handwritten reflections, and ceremonial objects were covered by Diana's restriction. The protected collection was private family property, meaning its contents were preserved for named relatives rather than general royal use. George, Charlotte, and Louis would one day inherit responsibility for those objects, not merely their beauty. Their parents understood that every decision made now would teach the children whether inheritance meant possession or care. William paused beside the sapphire and pearl headpiece. Wearing it at the approaching ceremony might have looked like a victory for Catherine, but it would also make his mother's final wish appear weaponized. A royal ceremony is a formal event where clothing, position, and jewels communicate public meaning. If Catherine wore the piece immediately after Camilla's exclusion, the audience would see triumph instead of protection. They agreed that it would remain inside the vault. William finally admitted what the corridor confrontation had awakened in him. Hearing Camilla dismiss Diana's instruction as an old grievance had revived anger, he believed he had mastered. The prince wanted to defend his mother with every power available to him. Catherine understood that fury, but she warned him that protecting Diana's dignity did not require repeating the family's old cruelty. Camilla could be denied access without being publicly destroyed. Catherine then confessed her own fear. She worried that the palace and the public would turn her into a symbol in a rivalry she had never chosen. The princess had accepted responsibility for Diana's possessions, but she had never claimed ownership of Diana's place. William took her hand and assured her that she was safeguarding a legacy, not replacing the woman who created it. Catherine checked the original envelope once more and discovered a shorter handwritten line beneath the inner fold. Diana had left her sons a deeply personal instruction: preserve love without surrendering your boundaries. The revelation came directly from the documented note, leaving no doubt about its source or meaning. William read the sentence twice. His anger did not disappear, but it changed direction. William approved a carefully worded palace announcement, a formal public statement issued in the royal household's name, confirming the restriction without exposing Diana's painful private language. Together, they placed the note inside a new protective case. He turned the key, handed it to Catherine, and said, "Keep it safe, not secret, and never cruel." Their decision removed revenge from the story. Now the world outside Windsor would give Diana's boundary a meaning of its own. By sunrise, one image had overtaken every argument. Outside Windsor Castle, a woman held a small photograph of Diana beside a handwritten sign reading, "Her voice still matters." Behind her, dozens stood silently along the barrier, while broadcasters described Catherine's decision as an act of guardianship rather than triumph. Inside the palace, however, Camilla watched that same image on television and understood how completely the public had connected the sealed note to Diana's unfinished story. The palace released its statement shortly after 7 o'clock. It confirmed that the restriction established by Diana and preserved by Queen Elizabeth II would be fully respected. A palace statement is an official public message carrying the royal household's authority, rather than one person's private opinion. Its wording was careful. The late Queen's order remained valid. The protected collection would stay under Catherine's custodianship, and no unauthorized transfer would take place. Broadcasters repeated one crucial distinction throughout the morning. Camilla remained queen, the formal title held by the monarch's wife. But that public position gave her no ownership over Diana's private possessions. The vault was a designated family store, not a national collection. This mattered because rank could determine where Camilla stood during ceremonies. Yet it could not grant her control over property preserved for William, Harry, and their descendants. Catherine watched the crowd outside Windsor grow larger. She felt moved by the white roses, photographs, and quiet messages supporting Diana's final boundary. Yet the princess also feared that sympathy for one woman might become cruelty toward another. Catherine had protected the restriction because it was right, not because she wanted Camilla publicly shamed. The louder the praise became, the more she worried that restraint was disappearing. Camilla remained alone as the coverage continued. The Queen Consort looked away when archival images of Diana appeared beside footage of the closed vault corridor. She had expected disappointment inside the palace, but not a national judgment delivered through one repeated image. Every headline seemed to turn the locked door into a verdict on her entire life, even though the order concerned only one private collection. The morning newspaper made that judgment impossible to escape. Its documented front page showed a sealed envelope beside a locked golden door under the headline, "Diana's Final Boundary Honored." The image transformed a private instruction into a public symbol. Diana was no longer being remembered only as a lost princess. She was being heard as a woman whose consent still mattered. Charles immediately directed palace communications to reject language describing the outcome as Catherine's victory. The king insisted that his household call it continuity, inheritance, and respect. Charles knew triumph would deepen Camilla's humiliation and turn Diana's protection into another royal contest. The crowd began laying white roses near the Windsor gate. Catherine closed the curtains and prepared to meet Camilla, not to renegotiate the order, but to end the personal battle surrounding it. The public had delivered its judgment. Now only the two women could decide what remained after the vault stayed closed. Catherine did not apologize for opening Diana's note, and Camilla did not ask again for the key. In their final private meeting, both women accepted the truth that had shaken the palace. Respect could exist without access, and reconciliation did not require the past to be rewritten. Diana's boundary would remain permanent. Yet instead of allowing that boundary to become another weapon, Catherine offered something more difficult than victory: a dignified end to the conflict. Catherine met Camilla alone in a small Windsor sitting room. William, Charles, the trustees, and every palace aide remained outside, leaving no institution to speak between them. The private vault was a protected family store, whose contents belonged to Diana's named descendants rather than the reigning household. Catherine confirmed that its door would remain permanently closed to Camilla, and every item would be preserved under the sealed instruction. Camilla finally explained her decision through that private conversation. The Queen Consort had pursued the sapphire and pearl headpiece because she believed wearing it might prove the monarchy had absorbed its divided past. She wanted one public symbol of peace. Yet Camilla now understood what Catherine had tried to tell her. Placing Diana's jewel around another woman's image would not heal history. It would look as though Diana had been erased from her own legacy. Catherine answered without cruelty. The princess told Camilla that the restriction was not a verdict on her entire life, her marriage, or her years of service. It was one boundary around one woman's private possessions, and respecting it did not make Camilla powerless. The distinction changed something between them. She took out the written jewel request, crossed through her signature line, and formally withdrew it. Charles later approved a separate ceremonial collection for his wife. A ceremonial collection is a group of jewels reserved for official events and public duties without affecting another family member's private property. The king protected Camilla's royal role while accepting the limit of his authority. Nothing would be taken from Diana to strengthen the queen. William made his own final decision. The prince ordered the sealed note preserved with a documented explanation for George, Charlotte, and Louis. One day, his children would learn that inheritance was not simply about receiving valuable things. It demanded restraint, responsibility, and respect for the dead. William had protected his mother without turning her pain into revenge. Camilla placed the unsigned request on the table, tore it in half, and left without bitterness. Catherine later returned Diana's note to its protective case, entered the vault, and locked the door. She kept the key. Diana's instructions survived. Catherine fulfilled her duty. Charles accepted that royal power had limits, while Camilla stopped trying to cross a boundary that was never hers to remove. The monarchy emerged chastened but steadier, having learned that unity cannot be created by taking possession of another woman's legacy. The final lock turned not as punishment, but as a promise that Diana's voice, possessions, and chosen boundaries would remain protected. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.